Hi, it's Shelli from the West Fork River Watershed Alliance, and today we're going to learn a little bit more about our local trees. It's winter time, so the trees don't have their leaves, so we have to look at some different clues to be able to figure out what kinds of trees we're looking at. So the first thing we want to do when we come upon a tree that we want to identify is we have to look at the branching. So our local trees around here have three different kinds of branching. So the first kind that we're going to talk about is called alternate branching, and it's when the twig has branches that come off on either side of the main stem. The next kind of branching that we'll be looking for is called whorled, and that's when they come off in a circle around one point on the twig. So you can see how these are coming off the same spot. And the third one is called opposite. So that's when the branches come off on either side of the twig. And there's actually only a few trees that have opposite branching, and you can remember those by remembering the phrase mad horse. So the M in mad horse is for maples, the A is for ash, the D is for dogwood, and horse is for horse chestnut. So when you come upon a tree like we have right here and we see that it has opposite branching, then we know it's going to be one of those trees that we were just listing. So when we look at this tree and we see that it has this really flaky, peely bark, we can look into one of our guides or online and see what kinds of trees have that. And then another hint for this type of tree is the color, because this is in the birch family, but there are a few birches that we have around here. So when you look at the color of the bark on this tree, it looks almost yellow or golden. And another clue would be looking at the buds. They have little buds that come off all the way down the branch. And lastly, it's never a bad idea to peel a little bit of the twig away and see what color is underneath there. So that nice green color is also a hint to tell us what kind of tree this is. Sometimes you even give it a smell. And this one smells like wintergreen. So all of those clues together will tell us that this is the yellow birch tree. So here's another distinctive bark when we look at this tree. The pattern that it has is almost like little diamonds that are made in the pattern of the bark. Like that's a great one right there. So this is the pattern that happens on the ash tree. So when you see that bark, you can tell this one's an ash. And if you remember from the branching, we can confirm it's an ash by looking up at the branches and seeing if it is actually an opposite branching tree, which this one is. Here's another great bark example for us to look at. This tree has very smooth gray bark, and it reminds me of like an elephant leg or something like that. That's what how I remember it in my head. So this is from the beech tree, and it's a good example of a different kind of bark to look for. So here's another great example. When we take a look at this tree, it has bark that flakes or peels off in big chunks. So this is typical for a cherry tree. They also are susceptible to getting some galls or fungus that grows on their bark. So that's another good way to be able to tell what kind of tree it is by some of the growths that might happen on the bark. So when we come up to this tree right here, the first thing we notice is it has alternate branching, and then you can see that the bark is green. So that's a good clue to tell you what this tree is. Anytime I see a tree with green bark, then I scrape a little bit off and give it a smell. If it smells a little bit like Fruit Loops, then I know it's the sassafras tree. The next thing that we're going to take a look at to try to identify which tree we have are the buds of the tree. So the buds are the part where the new leaf growth is going to be happening for next year. So you can see at the very ends of these twigs, there's a little bigger part that sometimes has different colors, like this one's a little bit red. Sometimes they're pointy, sometimes they have a cluster of buds at the tip. So we're going to take a close-up look at some different buds so that we can see and compare how they look on different trees.
So to take a close look at the buds and be able for you to see them on the video, we've brought some of them into the River Center and we're using our projection microscope to put them up on a TV screen. When you're out walking in the woods on your own, I suggest you bring a magnifying glass, or sometimes people bring something that's called a loupe. It's like a really small magnifying glass, and then you can get an even better look at some of the buds to be able to identify the trees. So our very first bud that we're looking at is actually from a beech tree. So on top of looking at the other clues at the bark and the branching, if you have a chance to get close enough to see the buds, they have very distinctive buds. So I remember these because they look kind of like a really skinny light bulb, like little Christmas bulbs that you used to put on the light strings at Christmas time. So they have a very pointy and long bud. So this part here is actually about an inch, which is pretty long for a bud, and they stick out and are very prominent. You can also see all the little scales to the bud where it's covering over the very end, which we also call the terminal bud, the one at the very end of the branch. So to compare the beech tree bud with another bud, like one from our maple tree. So these are much smaller. The actual bud is has a reddish color, which I'm not sure if is coming through the screen that you're looking at right now. It's also much more compact and rounded. And you can see we had talked about how maples have the branching of opposite. The buds still keep with that branching, so they are on either side of the stem. So we can tell it's one of the ones that are in the opposite, and then we just have to look at a guide or some pictures to see which kind of a bud it is. So the next one we're going to take a look at is from the birch tree, and all of the birches, their buds come off with like a little beginning part of the bud, so the bud doesn't sit right up against the branch. It has a little bit of a part down at the beginning, which sometimes I remember looks kind of like a little worm or caterpillar starting off. Like that's a good example right there of the beginning part before the bud comes off. There's also some branches like the birch trees. They have branches that have little speckles or dots on them. They're called lenticels. And let's see if I can zoom in a little bit. So here you can see them really well. They're the little dots that are sticking out right here in the microscope. Even if you're just looking at the branches, you can see there's like little polka dots markings on the branch. So that's another good way to identify. Some trees have the speckled, some trees don't. So you could tell which one you're looking at by those. Another really fun leaf scar and bud is from the walnut tree. So the leaf scar is the spot where the leaf attached to the tree, and usually there's some spot where the veins were running from the leaf into the branch. And so this one has a really interesting shape. It looks almost like a monkey face if you turn it this way, with a little smile, two eyes and a smile, and then the bud is right on top of that. It is also good to look at the very end bud, because sometimes that can help you identify from between a walnut tree and maybe a butternut tree. So it's good to look at that little end bud. And this one has like a sideways shape to it, along with its little monkey faces. Sometimes a branch will also have hairs on it, like this one right here. This is from staghorn sumac, so it has a lot of flecks and hairs. This branch is a little old, so the buds, you can't see them as well. Usually for sumac, the bud is almost encased, so circled by the leaf scar. This one's a smooth sumac, so it's a little bit different, but you can see the bud is almost covered by where the leaf scar is going to be. This one also has the little dots for the lenticels. And here's the end bud for smooth sumac. This is another twig that's a little bit older. I collected it a while ago. But I just wanted to show you how it looks similar to the walnut. The leaf scars are a similar monkey shape, but when you look at the end bud, it's kind of a yellowy brown color, where the walnut is a lighter color. So it doesn't have as much yellow in it. But they are similar, so two things that are pretty similar. Another thing to look for is if you have something that has pointy buds, like this one right here. These are from an oak tree, so they kind of have a cluster of buds and then they're pointy at the end, like these. One last thing you can look at if you happen to have, you're not 100% sure of what you're looking at. Sometimes the pith, which is the center part of the branch or stem that you're looking at, if you cut so that you can see it, sometimes there's a different color in there. So some branches are just one single color. This is, there's a maple pith right there, which doesn't have much that you can help to identify. But this is the black walnut again, and it actually has a dark pith, and it has little chambers or little sections to the pith. So that would be another way to help you to identify some winter trees when you have the branches and a little magnifier and some tools so that you can look a little closer at them.
So my last clue that I look for when I'm trying to identify a tree is whether it has any leftover seeds or flowers that are dried up and on the tree. So when you look at this one, you can see it has all of these. They actually look to me like peppercorns, and so that's how I remember sweet pepper bush, because it has these little leftover seed pods on it. So here we have an oak tree, and it's a good tree to demonstrate that some trees hang on to their dead leaves well into winter. So there's a few trees that do that, so it's a way to help you to be able to identify the tree. Well, thanks for joining us on our walk to learn a little bit more about trees in the wintertime. There are a lot of great resources for you to use on your own, either things that you can find online, or there are some books that I recommend. I love the Winter Tree Finder. It's a very small little book, so you can just fit it in your backpack. There's also a Winter Weed Finder, which is for just little flowers and grasses that are growing. You could use the Tree Finder to help you with bark and some other clues that will be able to tell you what kind of tree you're looking at. I also have this big book that's called the Tree Identification Book, and this has got some really great pictures of bark and buds and all of those kinds of things that can help you on your way. Be sure to check back and look at our YouTube channel to see our new videos.